In ESA's Owners Fights to Keep Their Rights, the show encompasses two girls at Norwich University who are registered with emotional support animals here on campus, and the struggles that they faced and are still facing with having emotional support animals on campus. I found this to be very relative since I myself had an emotional support animal in my freshman year of college and felt that this was a story that a lot of people didn't know too much about. You heard that sound? That's the sound of your best friend. But to some, that sound is their only means for survival.
Hi, I'm Melina Jackson, and about 2 months ago, I got Griffin, my emotional support animal.
Yep, so my name is Sierra Cornetti. I am a senior now. I'm an architecture major, RA, and my ESA is Alden Partridge, and I got him the end of my sophomore year, so almost 2 years now.
So, what was your experience like prior to receiving your emotional support animal? Like, what were the reasons for why you needed an emotional support animal?
So, I have been diagnosed with anxiety, depression, OCD, a bunch of other stuff, and I was having a difficult time before COVID, and with the pandemic, and they limited people to a room, so I ended up with no roommate, and I was worried about spending so much time alone that I just felt like I really needed something else there with me, and so I decided to bring my cat to school and started that process.
And how difficult was the process of being approved for an emotional support animal?
I think the most difficult part was probably trying to get Shauna Riley to respond to my email. All of them. But other than that, the process was pretty simple. It didn't take terribly long. I think I spent more time trying to get Sean to reply to my emails than actually filling out the paperwork and all the other stuff.
I've been diagnosed with anxiety and depression since I was 14, but I didn't show a ton of symptoms of it. I had it pretty well under control. That being said, I've always had animals. I've always had dogs, cats all my life. But coming to school, I didn't have that, and that's kind of how my therapist realized after an incident with a resident, I started getting really bad symptoms. Like I couldn't stop shaking, I couldn't focus, I would zero in on one thing. I could never seem to get anything done because my attention just kept popping to everywhere. And it was just hard to do a lot of things. And I was kind of starting to go down the drain with school. So I brought up the idea of an ESA because I'd been around animals all my life, and I think that's partly why I was able to cope with everything. And they thought that was a great idea. So, yeah.
How difficult was the process of being approved for an emotional support animal?
It's not hard for school, it's iffy because I had to go to the AAC. I had to have a counseling session with the Academic Achievement Center in regards to that, where they asked me why I think I needed it, my symptoms, how I was doing with classes and everything. And then they gave me the forms I needed. And they're like, you need to get these filled out, but you have to be with the person, the therapist, psychiatrist, social worker, for X amount of years, whatever. And I hadn't seen mine in a couple years. On top of that, I didn't have a dog at home that would be appropriate because it needed to be vetted. So we needed an email or a letter from the vet from the recent visit saying that it wasn't an overly reactive animal, for public safety and everything being on campus. So that was understandable. And in that sense, it was really difficult because I didn't have a dog at that time. I think it was more difficult for me than the average person because I went to a rescue and I wanted to get this rescue dog. but I had to get him registered as an ESA and approved by the school first. But for them to allow him on campus, he had to be my dog and approved.
Yeah.
But for me to adopt him, he had to already be approved to be on campus. So it was a weird 2-week period where he was allowed, but he wasn't allowed to be on campus, kind of thing. But
I myself had a similar issue regarding getting my emotional support animal, Luna. So back in freshman year, come first semester, I realized I wasn't doing so great. I had a terrible roommate at the time who would come into the room drunk and wake me up at like 2 a.m. every morning. Obviously, this wasn't ideal, and at my previous school that I was at before transferring to Norwich, we had to pay extra to have a single room, even if it was for medical reasons. And so I didn't have the money to actually be able to afford a single room. And because my emotional state and my depression and anxiety was getting so bad, I felt like the only logical way of handling it was to get an emotional support animal. So I went to go adopt my cat Luna at a rescue center, and basically because I had to have the cat already vaccinated prior to getting it on campus, and I couldn't get it vaccinated without having the cat in my possession. It kind of made for an odd 2-week period where my cat was actually staying an hour away at my friend's house, since my friend lived close to campus, and I would actually have to go pick my cat up, drive it to the vet, drop it back at my friend's house, come back, and then I had to turn in all the vaccination paperwork, and I had to get approved by a therapist, which wasn't too difficult. However, I did get scammed into believing that I needed a certificate, which costed about $120, because I thought that that's what you need to do in order to have an emotional support animal, was to have a certificate stating that, so that you could show it to people for housing and traveling reasons. So yeah, that's basically what happened. And finally, after those long 2 weeks, I was finally able to bring my cat Luna onto campus. And then when coming to Norwich, basically it was the same procedure. The only difference was I did have to get a current therapist to approve Luna as my emotional support animal, and basically go into further details on top of the emotional support letter that I already had from a previous therapist. I had to basically state why I needed an emotional support animal. So I had to go to my therapist and get basically the forms for Norwich filled out, stating that I needed an emotional support animal because of depression, anxiety, and PTSD. What are some things to consider before getting an emotional support animal?
I would say definitely consider the amount of time you have to spend with the animal. That was part of my decision to not bring like a dog or a larger animal, because they tend to need more like physical support and like spend more time with them. I don't have a huge amount of time in my schedule, so I thought that my cat would probably be a little better off here.
So there's a lot of things to consider, and it definitely differs on the person. So the biggest thing I think with ESAs is they help the most if you are a person that grew up with animals, because that's already something that you've grown a connection to. That's something you've grown a habit with, to like whether it's petting the animal, playing with them. It definitely helps more if you've already previously had a household pet that you were connected to in some way, shape, or form.
I definitely agree with Sierra. I think that you definitely need to judge whether you have the time, money, and capacity in order to taking care of this animal. For me, one of the hardest times came last semester when my cat got a very rare foot infection. I was paying, I paid over like $2,000 for his vet bills in order to get all the medication and surgeries required to getting him to hopefully be better. And unfortunately, he ended up passing away in the dorm rooms last year. And so, yeah, it was definitely a very difficult time for me because, you know, animals unfortunately don't live as long as their owners, and crazy things like, you know, rare infections can occur. So it's definitely something to keep in mind of whether you're able to afford to taking care of the animal, vet bills, food bills, all of that considered, emotional, you know, capacity to, you know, be able to be there for your animal and take care of them and play with them and give them that love and support that they need. Were there any issues that arose when getting approval for an ESA?
Not really. Just that Sean never responded to my email. I actually got my first email from him a couple days ago, ever, and I'm a junior.
Wow. How do ESAs differ from pets and service animals?
So ESAs are pretty similar to normal pets. I feel like they're closer to pets than they are to service animals. Service animals are considered medical equipment. Mm-hmm. You can't tamper with medical equipment, so they have a lot more rights than ESAs do. So they can go just about anywhere with their handler. And they also need special training. ESAs have general training usually. They're usually decently trained dogs or cats, but they don't need to go through any special training at all. And with that, the only real bonus to having an ESA is they're allowed to be housed with you, wherever you may be. And generally they're easier on flights to have on flights, but that's kind of iffy, and like trains don't allow ESAs.
Right.
Which it's supposed to be transportation and housing are the two big things for ESAs, when it's really only housing. And then pets don't have necessarily the same rights, so like you'll have to put down a pet deposit when you rent a place out in case they do damage. You don't have to do that as an ESA. And if it's no pet housing, they have to allow you because it's a ESA.
Right. How do ESAs differ from like pets and service animals?
So an ESA is sort of a middle ground between the two. He's not certified to be like a service animal. He doesn't help me like see things or anything. But he's not just a pet because he is allowed on campus. You're not allowed to have just pets on campus. You have to have a reason to need a pet on campus with you.
And outside of the schooling system, what exactly, like, sorry, let me reword that. Outside of the schooling system, would you have considered getting an emotional support animal, or is it solely because you needed to get an approval to having a pet on campus, therefore you registered your cat as an ESA animal?
I didn't really think of it that way when I had first applied, but I think now that I would probably have him as an ESA in general rather than just on campus. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it sort of does.
Okay.
So what's your experience been like since having an ESA?
Well, I've definitely improved on my grades, but COVID killed that. But as for having Alden, I've definitely found like my work ethic got higher. I definitely was more active both outside and with people. It definitely helps being an RA because everybody knows Alden, and it's definitely a way for me to connect with my residents because they love him, and who wouldn't? He's a big baby. But it's definitely really nice, and I know last year it was really fun because I actually went on play dates with other ESAs that were here that year that were also dog friendly, but it was really nice. It's been pretty good. I haven't really had any complaints.
It's definitely been better than it was before having him. I was here on campus for 2 years without him, and he's definitely been able to, like, keep me, I guess having a routine of, like, feeding something else, like, reminds me to eat and reminds me, like, you gotta get to somewhere. Really, like, helps me keep in a routine.
Like, it gives you, like, responsibility, you would say?
Yeah, and, like, structure.
Right. And how has your ESA helped you in coping with your mental health?
I think that just having him there to just even, like, just take a 10-minute break from really stressful homework, just sit there and focus on playing with him, petting him, just giving him attention, and I think that's really helped a lot.
How has your ESA helped you to cope? You kind of went into that, but...
Yes, so Alden is a big cuddle bug, and, like, my love language is touch. So, like, if I start getting anxious, like, he will come lay down on me. He'll, like, lay on my stomach and just, like, nuzzle into me, and he won't move. He's a big baby. But the biggest thing is just physically being there for me to hug, for me to pet and touch, to give myself a distraction, to move my hands, because I'm a very, even when I'm talking, like, even now, like, I move my hands. Mm-hmm. That's just who I am as a person. So having him there, like, when I start getting riled up about something, is a big relief. I will say, part of the reason I got a dog was because usually dogs wake you up when they have to go to the bathroom.
Right.
You know, it keeps you on a schedule. And he does keep me on a schedule better than I do myself. But this boy won't wake me up in the morning. And I've slept 14 hours before, and he's just laying there looking at me when I wake up. And I'm like, really? You didn't wake me up? Why? But, yeah.
Soon the rights of ESAs might be ending, and the very liberties of having an ESA on board a flight might be changing. ABC News reports the U.S. Transportation Department on Wednesday, January 22nd, announced plans to tighten rules around service animals, the biggest change being that only dogs could qualify. Airlines say that the number of support animals has been growing dramatically in recent years, and they have lobbied to tighten the rules. They also imposed their own restrictions in response to passengers who show up at the airport with pigs, turkeys, snakes, and other unusual pets. So soon the rights of the ESAs might be ending, and, like, the very liberties of having an ESA on board a flight might be, like, you know, changing to where it's, like, only allowed service animals, which only qualifies dogs nowadays.
Yeah.
So what are your views on this issue?
Well, to be fair, most airlines don't actually uphold any respect for ESAs currently. It's very tricky to allow them, like, a seat on board, because you need, like, a very recent doctor's note, like, letter and everything to try and have them on board with you, and it's a huge hassle, and to the point that, like, my dad's 18 hours away, I drive. It's just easier for me to drive than go through everything for that. So I'm not surprised that they're changing it, because trains, buses, it's only service animals, it's not ESAs. And I'm not totally against that, for the sole reason that ESAs might have general training. They also aren't required to have any training. So Alden is pretty well trained for a dog, but he's definitely not up to par with any service animal. And he loves other dogs. He's very reactive to other dogs. He wants to go say hi to other dogs, and he'll bark if he sees other dogs because he wants their attention. But that's not generally acceptable going onto a crowded public space. He's also skittish around guys he doesn't know. And the taller you are, the more skittish he is. And again, that's not really acceptable for doing that. So I understand it, and I'm not totally against it. The only thing I'd be concerned about is if they tried to strip the housing rights away.
Right. Yeah. Whether you are a dog or cat fan, or you just can't stand animals, I hope that you can at least see the need for why someone with a mental illness might benefit from having an emotional support animal. And I pray that you join us in the fight to end the hatred and stigmas surrounding emotional support animals and bring back the liberties that these owners deserve. Special thanks and consideration to Sierra Cornetti and Melina Jackson, who took the time out of their days to interview with me on the importance of ESA animals. I hope everybody has a lovely day. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.